Good morning, everybody. Buono estente. Got a couple of crazy games to share with you today, both of which feature excitable bishops. So this is the first one that I played this morning. It's King's Gambit. So we have e4 and I play e5 just to mix things up. And I get the King's Gambit and I have no idea how to play against this. So I think, well, let's try and be principled. So this pawn is attacking my e-pawn. So I thought defend it with a knight. One principle is to, whatever you need to do, if you can do it with development, then no bad thing. So yeah, I might lose a wing pawn, but at least then I get a knight into the center of the board in return for my opponent having only a pawn in the center of the board. So it feels like I actually get a development lead if I do that. Plus, of course, this king is rather exposed. Okay. I mean, the bringing the queen out this early just doesn't make sense because you can just meet it with that. So yeah, bring the knight out. He brings his knight out. Now I bring my bishop out. Now, this is kind of weird and funky. I mean, f6 is an idea, but of course that opens up line towards the king. And I know that I'm shutting off this pawn, and by shutting off this pawn, I'm shutting off this bishop as well. But I figure, look, maybe my bishop might have ideas coming out here. But, you know, thing is, pawns attack twice. I don't want to move my queen to e7 because that would block in the bishop as well. And so I give this a go. Now we have the bishop out, so we've got bishop and potentially knight now coming down looking at f7. So now I push f6 anyway, preventing the knight from coming here. White now castles, and I throw in a check. So this, now that this pawn is defended twice and attacked twice, this bishop isn't required. So I think let's improve the bishop, give it a bit more space, a bit more line of sight. And throw in a check, king moves over into the corner, and I play d6. And at this point now we're looking reasonably solid. So obviously I want to be getting my bishop out, probably here with a pin, get my queen out, probably castle long, yeah? Anyway, so we have an exchange of pawns in the middle, and I decide to recapture with my knight. Again, centralizing my knight, developing towards the center, and also developing towards my opponent's king. We have knight takes and d takes. And now, look at this bishop. Boom. Right, because this knight... Yeah, I mean, I just didn't figure that move out, but you see this... Okay, but anyway, so rook recaptures. Now that opens up the way to a fork. Queen h5 check. Okay, the rook is no longer defending the h7 pawn. So now I'm in a position where I have to get out of check. I can't defend the pawn. And if I push that, then queen takes the pawn, and then my rook's in danger, and my pawn's also in danger. Okay, so I play king d7. And now the queen comes in with check, so she doesn't take the pawn. And now I come here. Okay, so I'm not down in material at this point. Then the queen comes up there, and now I simply blunder. Right, so clearly the danger is, so the queen's put itself in a position where the bishop is pinned. Okay, so probably b4 to here would attack the bishop, and then the bishop can't move because of whatever. I now play a blunder. This is my first game of the morning, not caffeinated at this point in time. Caffeinated now. And queen takes a rook, because my queen was the only defender of that rook. So what I thought I would do, just check out the game report. I haven't looked at this yet. How did I screw up, and how am I supposed to play against the King's Gambit should I come across it again? And why I decided to play e5 against e4, I'm not really sure, because I'm so much more comfortable with the French defense right now. Normally when I'm playing people with just, you know, a normal game, apparently I even played better than my opponent there. Yeah, normally I just play to my normal repertoire, and I mix it up when I'm playing lower rated players for videos, but okay, book, book. What? It says. Okay, so here it's saying we should take the pawn. Take the free pawn. Okay. It is a free pawn. This guy is defended. It doesn't like this move. Okay, so now it's favouring white. In fact, although it says that I played more accurately than my opponent in this game, it said that white was basically winning for most of it. Okay, so bishop out, okay. Says he should have taken the pawn. Huh. Now that was unnecessary, but moving my bishop here would have also given up this pawn as well. Doesn't like that. That was okay. And now moving the king to there, now white is really quite winning. That's the best move, good. Take with a knight, that's good. Taking the pawn was better. Okay, knight takes, pawn takes. All right, but now it's definitely favouring white, yep. Doesn't like that, says it's a mistake. That's the best move. Queen there, best move, but now we're equal. And moving my king was wrong. It says I should have moved the pawn forwards. But if I move the pawn forwards, right, queen's going to take that. And then bishop e6. I didn't even think about it. I didn't even look at the bishop, right? Bishop e6 protects my position. My queen can come out here. My king can castle. Put the rook straight onto the semi-open d-file. And I'm good. I mean, and actually removing my h-pawn, if anything, will do me a favour because it means I can plonk my rook on there and start assaulting that king in the corner. And white is actually very far behind in development. So this is what I missed. I missed the fact that this guy's expendable, you know. Sometimes, you know, if you could just pick up your pawn and throw it on the floor, that is actually a good thing. So I was thinking, oh no, my rook, how am I going to defend my rook if the queen takes the pawn? Okay, and all I could think was a discovered defense by the queen. I never considered, because I'm a dumbass, never considered moving the bishop out with development, also bringing me a step closer to castling long, right? And look at this guy's development, he's got nothing. Should have memorized, all right. So, the lesson there is consider every possible move. I've got 28 minutes and 15 seconds left out of a 30-minute game. Come on, Hunty. We can do better than that. All right, then. Game number 2. Let's have a look. This goes on a bit longer. In fact, it goes all the way to the ending. But it's a fun game. e4, e5. Knight to c3, the Vienna game. And now, this funky one. Now, I don't know what to do in this position, but it felt as though my opponent knew what he was doing, because what he's doing is he's taking this square on this square away from my knight, but particularly d5. This knight loves to come to d5, where it's looking at these two squares where the queen might end up, and looking at this square with a nice fork. So this is an interesting one. I need to look this up. Okay, so I develop my other knight. We have queen flying out to f6, and now my knight can't harass the queen because this square is taken away by the pawn. Okay, so now bishop coming out, more pressure against here, bishop out, I just simply castle. This is all fine. Now he pushes a pawn, releasing this bishop, and I now attack the dark squared bishop because I looked and I can see that if he goes there, potentially I've got knight can take, but more likely c3. He can't go there, he can't go there. If he goes there, knight can take. If he goes here, I've got c3 or a3. So I can, if I wish, win the dark square bishop. And now, because it's first thing in the morning, I screw up. I lose my ability to calculate entirely, right? So he's attacking two of my pieces and I'm attacking one of his. So what do? Well, you don't do that. So what I just did here was I gave up, I swapped my bishop for a pawn, okay? Then I take his bishop and I'm thinking, okay, well I've got his pawns to like capture outwards, but then I realise that I'm actually a piece down. I'm a piece down, but I have some compensation. Okay, what's the compensation? Well, black isn't castled, and he's got these kind of advanced pawns which are not protected by pieces at all. I mean, these are undefended pieces, right? Undefended pawns. So, d3. We also note that we found ourselves in an opposite coloured bishop situation. Okay, so I have a dark squared bishop, he has a light squared bishop, which probably means I want to keep my pawns on light squares, giving my bishop freedom of movement and cutting down his. Okay, so now he plays f6. This is a prophylactic move. It's not stopping my bishop from going to g5 and harassing the queen. So bishop comes out here, looking at this pawn here, and the knight comes out to defend. Not a great place for a knight to be. Okay, so now I'm starting to look at maybe if I can get my queen to here, I could attack the knight and attack the pawn. First thing in the morning, I forgot to, I didn't realise that the queen was actually defending the knight, because I'm bleary-eyed and shouldn't be playing chess. Okay, bishop comes out now attacking the knight. Now if bishop takes knight, the only way I can recapture right now is with the pawn. I don't want to do that, and if I put my queen here or here to defend the knight, then I'm effectively pinning the knight, which is also not good. So I decide to move the knight out of the way, thinking about maybe playing f3, kick the bishop away, complete a nice light square pawn triangle. Knight comes out, and now I come in, flying in, attacking this pawn. Okay, I think I'm attacking the knight, but then I realise actually the queen's defending it, because my opponent just plays rook b8, defends this pawn, and I go, well, what about this knight? And then I go, uh-huh. Okay, so f3, kick the bishop. Bishop flies away. Now I decide to go for it. Now I decide f4, right? Let's gain this space. Let's try and just press on in the middle. My opponent has not yet castled. If I can prevent my opponent from castling, that's all good, right? So even f takes e5 might be an idea. Even f5 might be an idea. Just really shutting down the whole board for that bishop. So he moves his bishop back now, because I think he's anticipating, like, if I take here, queen recaptures, the queen's the only defender of the knight, right? So I could go and grab the knight. But I'm thinking about, well, what if takes, and then the queen's looking at this undefended pawn here, so I just move my rook across now to b1, and now that gives black time to castle. So now I have a decision. Do I want to capture on there, or do I want to push on? Okay. In the end, I actually push on, because I feel like, okay, it's a pawn in my opponent's face. It's in my opponent's half of the board. It's cutting down his options, cutting down that pawn push, cutting down, putting the bishop there, really, really shutting down this bishop's ambitions in the game. So I figured that push is best. Knight attacks queen, queen drops back now to d2, and now I've got ideas of crazy bishop action of my own. Okay, so the idea is like bishop takes h6, and then if pawn takes, queen takes, okay? And now my opponent is without pawn protection around his king. However, of course, you have to watch out for her maj. Her maj is there, and obviously also defending the pawn. So what can we do? Well, the first thing, well, it's my opponent's move, so knight comes in, and I can simply kick it with c3. The knight's got nothing, has to, off you go, knight, shoo, knighty. And now rook to f3, okay? Got to think about how many pieces are you using in your attack, and 2 pieces is not usually enough. It's usually not enough, okay? So the idea is I want to put my rook on g3 and pin this pawn. Even potentially the other rook might slide round and join in the fun, okay? Because basically what I've done here, I've got a barrier in the middle of the board, and look, his bishop is behind that barrier. It's quarantined in the wrong side of the board. These knights are doing nothing whatsoever. Nothing at all. Okay? They are kept in check really by this pawn mainly. So, time to attack. Rook comes across. I am unconcerned. Rook to g3. So now this pawn is pinned. So figure this one out, okay? Now, if bishop takes pawn, pawn can't recapture because it's pinned. It's an absolute pin. It would be illegal for the pawn to try and capture. Okay, if queen captures bishop, queen takes queen, and the pawn can't recapture because it's still pinned. Does my opponent realize that? My opponent does not. Okay, so now I get a free pawn. Bishop takes h6, king moves. Okay, this breaks the pin. This pawn is no longer pinned. This pawn can now capture the bishop. Okay, so something must happen. Rook takes g7 check. Okay, now black here does have an option of queen takes rook, bishop takes queen, king takes bishop, and he's traded a queen worth about 9 for a rook and a bishop worth about 8. Material currently is equal. He has an extra piece, but I'm 3 pawns up. I still have all of my little fellas on the board. They're all there. But here the king moves out of the way, and now I drop my rook back, adding a defender to this pawn. Also ideas of maybe rook h3 with discoveries. Haha, that would be good. He takes the pawn, knight takes. Pawn pushes, rook slides over to h3. Big threat now. Big threat of bishop there wins the queen with a discovered check. So he can't have that. King moves across, rook moves across. Check again. Okay, he can't go here because of the bishop. So he's got to move back. And now rook in again. So we repeat this pattern. Okay. King to there. Rook back. Now pawn takes. And interesting position. Pawn takes c3. The double attack on queen and pawn. But I noticed already that I have this skewer on the queen. Okay, if I move my bishop to here, we're skewering queen and then behind it the rook. So I play this move because I figure he takes my queen. Bye-bye queen. I take his queen. Look, bang. Comes with a check and a fork on the king and the rook. Okay, so he has to get out of check. And then I can win the rook. And then if his pawn that's here decides to promote, no worries. I just capture it with the rook, yeah? So, but he's up a pawn at this point. He's up. Now he grabs my queen. I grab his queen with check. King has to move. King only has 1 square to move too, right? h7. So now, what do? Bishop takes rook, right? If I pause at all here, the rook's going to run away and I've lost my advantage. Knight takes bishop. Knight takes pawn now. It's a free pawn. Okay? Pawns matter. At this point in the game, when the queens come off the board, pawns matter. Right? The way that you win a lot of games from this point is with pawns. Okay, so rook takes pawn. Didn't see that one coming. So obviously if I capture here, queen to there is check, king has to move to here. Not very nice at all, precious. So rook to d1, now giving up another pawn potentially. Now the bishop comes down to look at this pawn, and these are those points where you really have to take a deep breath, say I've got 20 minutes left on the clock, right? Don't screw this up. So this bishop's actually looking at this pawn, but this is okay. Because this is the biggest danger, right? This pawn here is not likely to win the game for black as far as things stand right now. Neither is this guy, okay? This guy's currently a big threat, but I'm up in material, right? I have basically, well, I've got a rook for 2 minor pieces, but I've got 5 pawns and he's got 3. So we're kind of equal. So bishop takes pawn. Rook takes knight. He completely missed that one. Rook takes knight. Rook takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. And now we find ourselves in an ending, but my opponent here is a pawn down and an exchange down. So he swaps off rooks. I don't think that was a clever idea at all. Okay, now I've got a king here with 2 pawns, right? And look, my king is able now to shepherd those pawns. His king is there, and his pawn's right over the other side of the board, right? So important piece now becomes his bishop. His bishop is his only long-range piece that can cover the whole kind of length or whatever of the board in a single jump. So I now come to here with my knight. Got ideas of maybe attacking the pawn there, right? Knight comes to here. And now I decide to swap off the bishop because I want to take off his only long-range piece, okay? A king at either of these pawns is enough to win the game. And at this point now, I'm up a full exchange and a pawn, attack the knight. Now I start to engage my king. Come here, look at the pawn. And now, this is very, very critical in your endgames. When do you strike out for promotion? Okay, so currently this pawn, that's its square, and the king is inside the square. So this king could stop the pawn, right? However, the king now moves away. So what I want to do, if I can trade my rook, well, if I can eliminate this pawn and maybe even leave the knight too far away from here for it to be able to stop my promotion, I can win the game. So this is where you have to be really careful with knights. You know, you have to say, okay, like 1, 2, and then he's guarding the promotion square. Okay, how many squares jumps in my way? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so he can get here in time. But I push h5 anyway. Just turn the screw. King attacks the rook. I put my rook behind my pawn. So now, if he plays a4, okay, if it's a foot race, I promote first, okay? And then look, if he promotes to here, potentially queen takes queen, okay? Like that. Very important. If you've ever seen the film, is it Searching for Bobby Fischer? It's got a different name in the UK, about a young kid playing chess. This exact scenario happens, or a very similar scenario, where he calculates that he'll get this exact situation where he promotes, his opponent promotes on the next move and then loses their queen. In fact, I think the king was in the way in a checkable position as well. So, not good. Okay, anyway, push the pawn. Now the knight comes in to stop the pawn. So I throw in a check. King has to move. Now I push again, and the knight has to come to one of these squares, okay? I think there was also a risk of a knight fork around here as well. Anyway, so now the knight's going to have to come to one of these squares to protect that. So the knight comes in there, I throw in another check. And now, the crucial mindset for an endgame is this. Can I find a way to ensure a win, even if it's ugly, right? So you are white in this situation. What would you do in this situation here? Okay, you have to ensure the win. So I calculated this through. This is what I figured. I'm going to promote my pawn. Knight is going to have to capture. Okay, knight has to capture. Then rook recaptures. And look, his pawn is still too far away. So whatever his pawn does, my rook can get to a8. I can take out his pawn, and then I am left with a king and a pawn. My king has the inside shoulder, rook b-turn, and his king is all the way over here, and there's nothing he can do. Okay, that's exactly how it goes. So queen promotes, pawn promotes the queen, takes, pawn starts to run, too little too late, I've got you. Take out the pawn, okay? Now, my pawn is here, light squared square, light coloured square on the corners, right? And so his king could, theoretically, capture my pawn, apart from my pawn can move 2 squares on the first move, and now this is the square. And the king is not in the square, and the king can't get in the square. Okay, and now this is the square. If the king could get in the square, it could catch the pawn. It can't catch the pawn. Pawn moves forwards. Okay, and now you're looking for the quickest checkmate if you can. So this is what I do, okay? His king moves here towards the edge of the board. Very bad idea. I mean, it's a lost position anyway, but its only hope is really a stalemate now. So queen here, so I'm a knight's move away from the king. Okay, but now the king can't move in any of these squares. Okay, all it's got is these, right? Now, so king moves there, I just move my king up. No worries. Nice and easy. Okay, now his king moves into opposition with my king. This is opposition 2 squares away in a straight line, which means that he now cannot enter these 3 squares. So, queen up now to the next rank means the king's in check, can't go anywhere on this rank, and can't go anywhere on this rank, so he has to go to the back rank. And now I simply move forwards, and whatever he does, in fact he's only got 1 legal move, he has to go to d8, and then queen there, check and mate. So there you go. Another kind of crazy game, another fun one. I'm trying at the moment to play more principled chess, particularly in the openings. And this book, by the way, Logical Chess, Move by Move by Irving Chernev. Brilliant book. I own multiple books on chess. This is the best book, and I've only been through game number 1. Okay, so I've been recommending this to my students as well. It's a fantastic book, and the reason is because it plays through selected master level games throughout history, and Chernev explains the logic and the reasoning behind every single move from move 1 to the final move of the game in each one. I've been through game number 1, and yesterday we went through game number 1 with Don, one of my students, and we went through it in a lesson, actually. Took pretty much the whole lesson, and it was really illuminating to go through that game a second time. Particularly the logic that goes behind the opening moves. So if you want to improve your chess, Logical Chess, move by move, you can get it in ebook format, you can get it in paperback or whatever. Highly, highly recommended. There you go. But that's it for today's video. Couple of crazy games for you to enjoy. Hope it's been interesting, hope it's been fun. Hope you've picked up 1 or 2 things that can help improve your chess. Only remains for me to thank you for watching and ask you to subscribe to Chess Bootcamp if you're not a subscriber, and I'll see you soon.